I was sitting in my empty apartment staring at the eviction notice when my phone rang. The lawyer's voice was professional but gentle as he delivered news that would change everything. My grandfather had passed away, leaving me his farm in rural Montana. I hadn't seen Grandpa Joe in 5 years, not since the family falling out that scattered us all to different corners of the country. The timing felt surreal. I'd just lost my job at the tech startup, my savings were gone, and my girlfriend had moved out the week before. At 32, I felt like I'd failed at everything that was supposed to matter. The apartment lease was up, and I had nowhere to go. The property includes 40 acres and the original farmhouse, the lawyer continued. Your grandfather left specific instructions that it should go to you, along with some personal items he wanted you to have. I remembered summer visits to that farm as a child. Grandpa Joe teaching me to milk cows, showing me how to read the weather in the clouds, his weathered hands guiding mine as we planted vegetables in neat rows. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. There's no mortgage, the lawyer added. The property is yours free and clear. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my bare apartment one last time. Maybe this wasn't just an inheritance. Maybe it was a lifeline. With nothing left to lose in the city, I made a decision that would lead me to discover something extraordinary about the man I thought I knew, and about the incredible legacy he'd been quietly preparing for decades. The gravel driveway crunched under my car tires as I pulled up to the farmhouse for the first time in years. The 2-story white house looked smaller than I remembered, its paint peeling and shutters hanging at odd angles. Weeds had claimed the front porch, and the old oak tree where Grandpa had hung a tire swing now stood bare, its massive branches reaching toward an overcast sky. I sat in the car for several minutes, overwhelmed by the silence. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just the whisper of wind through tall grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The contrast to my cramped city life was jarring. The front door key was exactly where the lawyer said it would be, under the third loose board on the porch steps. As I turned the lock, the door creaked open to reveal a time capsule. Everything was exactly as Grandpa had left it. His coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table, a thin film of dust covering its rim. His reading glasses lay folded beside yesterday's newspaper, dated 3 months ago. The house smelled like old wood, coffee, and something else I couldn't quite identify, maybe the lingering scent of the pipe tobacco he used to smoke on the back porch. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, including several of me as a child, grinning gap-toothed beside prize-winning tomatoes. Walking through those rooms felt like stepping back into my own childhood, but also like meeting a stranger. This was Grandpa's private world, the life he'd lived alone after Grandma passed. I realized how little I actually knew about the man who'd shaped so many of my earliest, happiest memories. I spent the afternoon moving through the house room by room, each space telling a story I'd never heard. Grandpa's bedroom was sparse but organized, his clothes still hanging neatly in the closet. On his nightstand sat a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his careful handwriting documenting daily weather patterns, crop rotations, and what he called garden experiments. The living room revealed his hidden intellectual side. Shelves lined every wall, packed with books on botany, sustainable agriculture, and seed preservation. I'd never known he was such a scholar. As a child, I'd only seen him as the gentle farmer who let me help with chores and told stories about the old days. In his desk drawer, I found letters he'd written but never sent, including 3 addressed to me over the past 2 years. My throat tightened as I read his careful words asking about my life, sharing memories of our time together and expressing regret about the family rift that had kept us apart. He'd been thinking of me, missing me, while I'd been too proud and too busy to reach out. The kitchen revealed his simple but thoughtful lifestyle. Mason jars filled with dried herbs lined the windowsill. His refrigerator held mostly vegetables, many varieties I didn't recognize. A hand-drawn map on the wall showed the property divided into sections with cryptic labels: heritage plot, experimental zone, and the sanctuary. But it was in the basement that I found something truly mysterious. Behind his workbench, tucked into a wooden cabinet, sat dozens of small envelopes and glass jars, each carefully labeled in his precise handwriting. Seeds, hundreds of different varieties, some with names I'd never heard, others marked with dates going back decades. The basement felt like stepping into a secret laboratory. Grandpa had converted the space into what could only be described as a seed library. Wooden shelves lined the walls, each holding carefully organized containers of seeds. Some were stored in traditional paper envelopes, others in small glass vials, and a few precious varieties were kept in what looked like scientific storage tubes. I pulled down one envelope marked Cherokee Purple Tomatoes, 1987. Another read Glass Gem Corn, Original Stock. There were beans I'd never heard of, Hidatsa Shield and Turkey Craw, squash varieties with names like Cushaw Green Striped and Pennsylvania Dutch Crookneck. Each package was dated and included detailed notes about growing conditions, harvest times, and something called genetic purity. In the center of the room sat a large wooden table covered with what appeared to be his current project. Magnifying glasses, small brushes, and notebooks filled with sketches of plant structures. A sign hanging above the workspace read, "Preserving tomorrow's food today." But what stopped me cold was a thick folder labeled, "For my grandson." Inside, I found a letter in Grandpa's handwriting, along with detailed planting charts and what looked like a master plan for the entire 40 acres. The letter began, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you need this more than you know." My hands shook as I continued reading. He'd spent 30 years collecting and preserving rare seed varieties, many of them heirloom plants that were disappearing from commercial agriculture. Some were seeds his own grandfather had brought from Europe. Others were varieties he'd traded with farmers across the country or rescued from abandoned homesteads. "These seeds carry stories," he'd written. "They're living libraries of flavor, nutrition, and resilience that the world is forgetting." I carried the folder upstairs and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Grandpa's letter continued for several pages, revealing a side of him I'd never imagined. He wasn't just a simple farmer. He was a guardian of agricultural heritage, quietly working to preserve genetic diversity that commercial farming was erasing. "Each variety tells a story of survival," he'd written. The Cherokee Purple Tomato survived the Trail of Tears. "The Glass Gem Corn carries the prayers of Osage ancestors. These plants have fed families through wars, droughts, and depressions. They're tougher and more nutritious than anything you'll find in a grocery store." His notes detailed the unique properties of each variety. The Turkey Craw beans could fix nitrogen in poor soil. The Cushaw squash could store for over a year without refrigeration. The Hidatsa Shield beans were drought-resistant and had sustained plains tribes for centuries. He'd spent decades not just growing these plants, but studying their genetics, their nutritional profiles, and their cultural significance. "I've been waiting for the right time to share this with you," the letter continued. "I know we haven't talked much lately, and I know you've chosen a different path. But I believe you have the patience and the heart to understand what these seeds represent." There were detailed planting instructions for each variety, including soil preparation, companion planting suggestions, and harvest techniques. Some seeds needed special treatment, cold stratification, scarification, or specific temperature conditions. Others were noted as beginner-friendly, with smiley faces drawn beside them. The final page of his letter made my eyes water. "These seeds saved me after your grandmother died. Watching them grow, tending them, knowing I was preserving something precious, it gave my life meaning again. I hope they can do the same for you." The next morning, I walked the property with Grandpa's hand-drawn map, trying to understand his vision. The land was more diverse than I'd remembered. Rolling hills gave way to a flat area near a creek, perfect for water-loving crops. A south-facing slope caught maximum sunlight, while a depression near the barn stayed naturally moist. His map divided the 40 acres into zones based on microclimates, soil types, and water availability. The heritage plot was a 5-acre section with the richest soil, reserved for his most precious varieties. The experimental zone was where he'd tested new acquisitions and developed his own cultivars through careful selection. I started with basic soil preparation, following his detailed notes. The old tractor still ran, though it took some coaxing. As I worked the earth, turning under last year's crop residue and weeds, I found myself thinking about the generations of farmers who'd worked this same soil. My great-grandfather had homesteaded here in 1923. 4 generations of my family had planted and harvested on these acres. The physical work felt good after months of desk jobs and screen time. My soft city hands developed blisters, then calluses. My back ached from bending over garden beds, but it was a different kind of tired than I'd felt in years, the satisfied exhaustion of meaningful work. Following Grandpa's instructions, I added compost from the pile he'd been building for decades. The rich, dark material crumbled between my fingers, full of earthworms and the sweet smell of decomposition. I tested soil pH with his old kit, adjusting beds with lime or sulfur as his notes indicated. Each evening, I'd sit on the porch with his journals, planning the next day's work and learning about the seeds I'd soon plant. 3 weeks after arriving, I finally felt ready to plant. I'd prepared 12 separate garden beds according to Grandpa's specifications, each one tailored to the needs of specific seed varieties. The weather forecast showed a week of gentle spring rains ahead, perfect timing according to his notes. I started before dawn, working by the light of the same kerosene lantern Grandpa had used for early morning chores. There was something ceremonial about opening each seed packet, seeing varieties that had been carefully preserved for decades. Some seeds were tiny, like the poppy-sized amaranth. Others, like the lima beans, were large enough to see the intricate patterns on their shells. The Cherokee purple tomato seeds went into carefully prepared hills, each one blessed with a handful of compost and positioned to catch the morning sun. The glass gem corn required precise spacing. Grandpa's notes emphasized that this variety needed room to develop its spectacular rainbow kernels without cross-pollination from other corn. As I worked, I found myself talking to the seeds, feeling slightly foolish but somehow compelled to share my hopes with them. "Grow strong," I whispered to the turkey craw beans. "Show me what you can do," I told the ancient squash varieties. The most precious seeds went in last. Grandpa had marked certain packets with red stars, indicating varieties that were extremely rare or had special significance. A packet of mortgage lifter tomatoes, developed during the Depression by a man who paid off his house by selling the massive fruits. Seeds of moon and stars watermelon, nearly extinct until rescued by dedicated gardeners. By sunset, I'd planted 47 different varieties across the prepared beds. My hands were black with soil, my back ached, but I felt more accomplished than I had in years. I'd planted not just seeds, but hope itself. The days that followed were an exercise in patience unlike anything I'd experienced. In the tech world, everything was instant, code compiled in seconds, emails arrived immediately, problems demanded immediate solutions. But seeds operated on their own timeline, indifferent to human urgency. I developed a routine that would have seemed impossible during my city life. Up at sunrise to check the garden beds, looking for any sign of germination. Watering with the old sprinkler system Grandpa had rigged up, careful not to disturb the soil where seeds lay sleeping. Evenings spent reading his journals and agricultural books, learning about the varieties I'd planted. The waiting was harder than the physical work. Some seeds, like the radishes and lettuce, were supposed to sprout within days. Others, particularly the tomatoes and peppers, could take weeks. I found myself checking the beds multiple times daily, searching for tiny green shoots that stubbornly refused to appear. Doubt crept in during the second week. Maybe the seeds were too old. Maybe I'd planted them wrong, too deep or too shallow. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this kind of life. The silence of the farm, which had initially felt peaceful, sometimes felt oppressive. No co-workers to bounce ideas off, no restaurants to escape to, no distractions from my own thoughts. But I kept following Grandpa's routines. Morning coffee on the back porch, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. Evening walks through the garden, noting which areas stayed moist longer, where the soil was warming fastest. I began to understand why he'd loved this life. The deep connection to natural rhythms, the satisfaction of working with your hands, the profound quiet that let you hear your own thoughts. By the third week, I was beginning to worry that nothing would grow. On a Tuesday morning in late April, I walked out to check the beds and stopped dead in my tracks. Tiny green shoots had pushed through the soil overnight in the radish section. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, their seed leaves perfectly formed and reaching toward the morning sun. I knelt in the damp earth, hardly believing what I was seeing. After 3 weeks of faith and daily watering, life had finally emerged. The sprouts were so small, so delicate, yet they'd managed to break through the soil with a force that seemed miraculous. I understood suddenly why Grandpa had found such meaning in this work. Over the next few days, the garden exploded with activity. The lettuce varieties sprouted in neat rows, each one slightly different in leaf shape and color. The bean beds showed the first curved shoots pushing up, still wearing their seed coats like tiny helmets. Even some of the slower varieties began to show signs of life. I called my sister Sarah for the first time in months, unable to contain my excitement. "You should see this place," I told her. "Grandpa's seeds are actually growing." She was surprised to hear from me, even more surprised to hear the enthusiasm in my voice. I'd been so defeated when I left the city, but something about watching these plants emerge had rekindled a sense of possibility I'd forgotten I possessed. The Cherokee purple tomatoes were among the last to appear, but when they did, their distinctive purple-tinged stems made them unmistakable. I checked Grandpa's notes and confirmed these were indeed the rare variety he'd been preserving, descendants of seeds that had traveled the Trail of Tears. Each morning brought new discoveries. The glass gem corn pushed through the soil in perfect rows, their shoots thick and vigorous. The ancient bean varieties unfurled their first true leaves, each one genetically connected to plants that had fed indigenous communities for centuries. As the weeks passed and the plants grew larger, I began to realize that what was emerging from Grandpa's seeds was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The vegetables developing in the garden bore little resemblance to their grocery store counterparts. The tomatoes were taking on unusual shapes and colors, some deep purple, others striped green and yellow, a few developing the distinctive ribbed appearance of true heirloom varieties. The corn was the most spectacular surprise. As the glass gem variety matured, I could see hints of the rainbow kernels it would eventually produce. Grandpa's notes explained that this variety had been developed by a Cherokee farmer named Carl Barnes, who spent years selecting for the most colorful kernels. Each ear would be unique, displaying jewel-toned kernels in patterns that looked more like stained glass than food. But it was the beans that truly amazed me. The Turkey Craw variety was producing pods unlike anything I'd ever imagined. Long, curved shapes that did indeed resemble a turkey's craw. The Hidatsa shield beans were developing distinctive patterns on their pods, geometric designs that seemed almost intentional. These weren't just vegetables, they were living art pieces. I started researching the varieties online and discovered that many of them were considered extremely rare. The Cherokee purple tomatoes sold for premium prices at farmers' markets. The glass gem corn had been featured in National Geographic. Some of the bean varieties I was growing existed in fewer than a dozen seed collections worldwide. Grandpa hadn't just been a hobby gardener, he'd been a serious conservationist, preserving genetic material that was disappearing from the world. His basement seed library represented decades of careful selection, trading with other preservationists, and maintaining pure genetic lines of irreplaceable varieties. As I walked through the garden each evening, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. These plants were living heritage, and I was now their guardian. By midsummer, the garden had transformed into something that seemed almost magical. The heritage plot looked like a living museum of American agriculture, with varieties spanning centuries of cultivation. The mortgage lifter tomatoes were producing fruits so large I needed 2 hands to hold them. The Moon and Stars watermelon vines were spreading across their designated area, already showing the distinctive spotted pattern on their leaves that gave the variety its name. The experimental zone was equally impressive. Grandpa had been working on developing his own cultivars through careful selection, and the results were extraordinary. His prairie sunset beans combined the drought tolerance of indigenous varieties with improved yields. His Homestead Gold squash produced fruits that could store for over a year while maintaining their nutritional value. I'd started keeping my own journal, documenting growth patterns, harvest dates, and flavor notes. The Cherokee Purple tomatoes had a complex, wine-like flavor unlike any tomato I'd ever tasted. The Glass Gem corn, when ground into meal, produced cornbread with a nutty sweetness that made store-bought corn products taste like cardboard. Neighbors began stopping by, drawn by curiosity about the unusual varieties visible from the road. Mrs. Henderson, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for 3 generations, was amazed by the turkey craw beans. "I haven't seen those since I was a little girl," she said, tears in her eyes. "My grandmother grew them during the Depression." Word spread through the rural community about the heritage garden on the old Johnson place. People brought their own family seeds to trade, sharing stories about varieties their grandparents had grown. I realized that Grandpa had been part of an informal network of seed savers, quietly preserving agricultural diversity while the commercial world moved toward genetic uniformity. The garden was becoming more than just a collection of plants. It was a connection to the past and a bridge to the future. As harvest season arrived, I finally understood the true scope of what Grandpa had accomplished. The yields were extraordinary, but more importantly, the quality was unlike anything I'd experienced. These heritage varieties hadn't been bred for shelf life or uniform appearance. They'd been selected for flavor, nutrition, and adaptability to local conditions. I spent weeks carefully harvesting and processing seeds for next year's planting, following Grandpa's detailed instructions for maintaining genetic purity. Each variety required specific techniques. Some needed fermentation, others required careful drying, a few demanded precise timing to prevent cross-pollination. In his final journal entry, which I discovered tucked inside a seed packet, Grandpa had written, "The real harvest isn't the vegetables. It's the knowledge, the connection to the land, and the responsibility to preserve what's been entrusted to us. These seeds carry the wisdom of generations. They're not just plants. They're hope for the future." I understood now why he'd left this to me. Not because I was a farmer, but because I needed to learn what he'd discovered after Grandma's death. That meaning comes from nurturing something larger than yourself, from being part of a chain of stewardship that connects past and future. The city life I'd lost no longer seemed like a failure, but like a necessary detour that brought me to where I needed to be. I was no longer just growing vegetables. I was preserving genetic heritage, maintaining biodiversity, and connecting with a community of people who understood that some things are too valuable to lose. As I sealed the last of this year's seed harvest into carefully labeled containers, I realized that Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the farm or even the seeds themselves. It was the understanding that we're all temporary guardians of something precious, and our job is to tend it carefully and pass it on to the next generation. Thank you so much for listening to this story about hope, heritage, and the incredible surprises that can grow from the smallest seeds of faith. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please tell me what part of the world you're listening from, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales. Your support means everything to me, and I can't wait to share more stories that celebrate the unexpected magic in our everyday lives.